Welcome to everybody. I want to say thanks for being here. This is the final session of our Frontier Firm series that we've been doing since the beginning of the year. If you've been with us across the first 4 sessions, you probably already know that we've been building a little bit towards this moment. And if this is your first one, don't worry about it. You're not really behind. You're really just kind of walking in where this is going to get to like a practical application. A little quick housekeeping before I jump in. We're going to record this and we'll get the replay back probably by tomorrow or early next week. But if you have any questions, drop them in the chat as we go along. I'd rather that I answer some of the specific questions that you might be dealing with and get it in here so I can talk about it throughout the talk. But I do have a little bit of time carved out for Q&A at the end if you want to, ask any questions. So if you have something like, hey, what about my plant? Or like, what about my regulated environment? Go ahead and get it in early. I'm going to try to weave it in as we talk about some of the other topics. But in today's session, we had the word security like at front and center on it. And I want to be a little bit clear about this right out of the gate. This isn't like a security scare talk. We're not here to walk through a wall of like breach statistics or a giant list of like vendor add-ons or products. I'm really just here to talk about like agentic workflows and how you actually operate inside of a real organization. It's about the control systems that are going to let you scale agents without the chaos that typically goes with it. And we'll be talking about why this operating model, not like policy PDFs, is really what separates organizations that capture AI productivity from organizations that merely buy a bunch of AI tools. So let's get into it. Let's put today into context. This series has had a pretty clear arc, and we did this deliberately at the beginning. Part 1 was about the culture and the organizational readiness. Before we ever got into the tools, we started talking about the foundations, values, accountability, clean data, and the standard ways of working. Because if you skip all this culture work, AI transformations are going to fail. And that's really what we see happening in the marketplace. Not failing, but like if you skip that. Part 2 was intelligence on tap. This was about how Copilot lands at the individual level. So more like a digital intern that gives every employee a productivity lift. For most people, this is where AI shows up first in your daily work. And then part 3, we reframe the organization itself from an org chart to a work chart. Once humans and agents started working in the same team, you had to stop thinking about like reporting lines and start thinking about how the work actually flows throughout the day. And then part 4 was becoming an agent boss and managing a work group that includes like digital labor. We talked about concepts like ownership and lifecycle observability and the muscle that's needed to lead agents the way that you would lead like normal people in your organization. So today it's capstone. First 4 sessions, we talked about how AI shows up in the business. Today, it's about how to make sure that it shows up safely, responsibly, and in a way that leaders can actually manage this at scale. So governance isn't really new in part 5. It's just we planted it all the way back in 1. What we're doing is kind of bringing the whole picture together. So here's the question. How do we scale AI without scaling risk? Most of the executives that I've talked to in the last 6 months had some version of this question right out of the gate. The board's asking about AI. The CFO is asking about AI. Line of business leaders are asking when they can have what all their peers down the street are already using. And somebody, usually reporting to the CIO, the CISO, or the chief risk officer, has to figure out how to say yes without setting the building on fire. Now, here's the answer. And this is going to be part of like what we're talking about the next 45 minutes. The frontier firm cannot scale on trust alone. It needs more verifiable trust. That means that every user, every agent, every prompt, and every data source, every tool, every action, they all need the right identity, the right access, the right policy, monitoring that goes along with it, and the right life cycle. I know that's a lot, and we're going to dig into it, but let's start by looking at why right now. Why May of 2026 is a different moment than 6 months ago. This deck really looks different than it would have if I had written this 6 months ago, and that matters because it's changing the conversations that we should be having internally. Just May 1st, the beginning of this month, Microsoft Agent 365 went generally available. Microsoft Entra Agent ID went GA the same day, and Purview protections for Agent 365 also hit the documentation as GA. So these aren't really separate, three different product launches. What it is Microsoft saying in a single day that the agent governance story is no longer just a slide deck. Funny that I'm saying that as I put it into a slide deck, but it's an actual product. And now, if we back up, 6 months from there, let's look at this a little bit more historically. In December, Purview Network Data Security started catching unmanaged AI apps the way it catches like unmanaged file shares. In February, Defender for Cloud added AI threat protection in preview. In March, we had Microsoft publishing explicit zero trust guidance for autonomous agentic risk. And in April, we had the Foundry control plane and observability documentation that expanded things a little bit more significantly. Every one of those was a building block leading up to May, really, if you look at this reflectively. The building really hasn't stopped either, though. Look at what's coming up in the future. May 19th, we've got the European Commission opening high-risk AI classification that if you operate in Europe or if you sell in Europe, you probably want to put something like this on your radar. May 21st, we've got Agent 365 registry documentation that was rolled out. That covers Bedrock, Vertex AI, Agentforce, Databricks. July 1st, just a few weeks from now, Agent 365 subscriptions are going to become a requirement for some of the Defender agent protection features. And so what does all this mean? It means that if you walk away from today thinking that AI governance is something that you're going to put on a roadmap for 2027, you're already falling a little bit behind. The platform reality is really changing right now, and that means that these kinds of conversations need to change with it. So here's the qualitative shift that kind of matters. If you think about what copilots are, they mostly answer. You ask a question, you get a response. The primary risk is just bad output. You've heard of hallucinations, oversharing, maybe it drafted an embarrassing email. But agents are different. They remember things. They have tool calls. They access actual systems. Agents take action with delegated authority and sometimes with very, very little human involvement. And that's where you give software the ability to act. And when you do that, the risk surface moves from what it says to what it does next. And so look at some of these flows that I put up here on the screen. A user gives a prompt, the model interprets it, the agent calls a tool, and maybe that tool is an API, maybe it's an MCP server, maybe it's a connector into your ERP system or your CRM. The tools that it's touching, they're external systems. And with that comes side effects. So an order gets placed, a record gets updated, the email actually gets sent out. Maybe a payment gets released. Every one of those things is a place where something can actually go wrong. Now, I promise this wasn't going to be like a bunch of scare stuff, but prompt injection happens from a document that maybe an agent retrieved. Tool misuse, because the permissions were too broad. We have data leakage because the agent's context includes things that maybe it shouldn't. And something that people are running into a lot just in their daily use is memory poisoning, where like past interactions can corrupt like the context window and do things to the future behavior. And when we get into like these multi-agent systems that we're starting to develop now, these failures begin to cascade. One bad call starts to propagate all the way down the line through the other ones. So what I would say is that AI does not create new governance problems. All it really does is expose the ones that you already had, but it gives them a turbocharger. So that bad SharePoint permission, things you've been meaning to clean up for the last 5 years, those are all now AI surfaced permission problems. And the broken process that you tolerated because maybe it only ran like once a month or once a quarter, that broken process now runs all the time at agent speed. Same problems, faster, broader, and they're definitely going to be harder for you to ignore. So that's really what the threat model looks like today. So risk in the abstract is hard to act on, though. So let me give you 4 shapes that this problem is starting to take. The 4 failure modes that I see in most of the conversations that I have. The first one, shadow AI. Employees, they're already using these tools, frankly. And even if you didn't authorize them, people are using ChatGPT, they're using Claude, they've got the free image generators, whatever's the easiest thing for them to get. But they're not being malicious people. They're not trying to break the rules. What they're just craving to do is be productive. And they went around you because the sanction path that you created for them was too painful, or even with a lot of organizations, especially in the Midwest, that's just too slow. Second problem I see is oversharing. SharePoint sites, your shared drives, most of those permissions have been set up over the course of the last decade, multiple decades, drifted for years. Nobody noticed it because nobody could find the files. And the thing that's different right now is that Copilot, it can find all of the files. Everyone can find the files because everyone can use Copilot. And that's not really a Copilot problem when you think about it. It's a permissions problem that Copilot exposed. Speaking of permissions, over-permissioning agents. Somebody builds an agent for a very, very specific task and gives it the credentials of a service account. That's what's been happening for the most part. It works great until it does something that it's not supposed to do. And then finally, unobserved actions. So agents do things, you don't necessarily know what, and you don't know why, and you don't know whether it was the right thing because there was no audit trail, because there was no telemetry. And so that's another area that people should start thinking about. And these are the 4 failure modes: shadow AI, oversharing, overpermissioned, and unobservable actions. If you don't remember anything else from today, try to remember those 4 things, because this is really a talk about how Zero Trust is going to help you overcome those. And that's the thesis of our webinar here today. Verify every agent, constrain every tool, protect every data path, observe every run, approve every high impact action. Verify, constrain, protect, observe, and approve. Those 5 verbs, they map directly to the failure modes that I just talked about. And they map directly into Microsoft's Zero Trust principles. Verify explicitly, use least privilege, and assume data breach. Verify each agent means that every actor in your environment, whether it's a human, an agent, or even just a workload, it has an identity that you can verify. You're not trusting vibes, you're trusting an identity that has been authenticated, governed, and reviewed. Constrain every tool means that the agent only has access to what the task requires, not a service account, not a service account's whole life, not every API, not every system it might need someday, just the tools using the scopes and actions required to do the job that's in front of it. Protect every data path means that the data the agent can see, what it's grounded in, or act on is governed by the labels, sensitivity, permissions, and DLP. Copilot only sees what you as the user is allowed to see. And agents, when they're built, should only be able to reach what they're allowed to reach. Observe every run means like every action leaves evidence. So we're talking about traces, telemetry, evals, monitoring, all those like little components, not just like the question, does it run? Did it run? What did it do? What did it touch? Those types of questions. And every one of these is going to have some sort of a risk assessment assigned to it. So when we have low risk, all we're really doing is like monitoring it. We have medium risk. We want to do something like review exceptions. High risk activities are going to require explicit approval before the action happens. And so try to remember these, 3-5 verbs that I laid out on the screen. And we're going to dive deep into each one of these. So most governance conversations start with the model. A lot of people start asking questions like, what model are we using? Has that one been approved? Is it safe? And I would say that that's the wrong starting point. The better question is, what is this agent going to do? And we've talked about these risk tiers before. We want to risk tier those actions, not the model. So Microsoft's own maturity guidance is explicit on all of this. Treating the agents the same regardless of their criticality, that's a mistake. And here's the tiering that Concurrency has been recommending to clients. Tier 1 is like the retrieval and the assist patterns, like the Q&A kind of agents. The agent answers questions, summarizes documents, it drafts emails or helps with the research. Side effects on something like this is just the text on the screen, so we can score the risk lower. Minimum control, we're looking at monitoring and auditing, pretty much it. You want to know what is being asked and how it was answered, but you probably don't need approval gates for someone that's just going to be summarizing some content like a maintenance log. In tier 2, we're talking about like task agents. So an agent here is going to execute scoped actions with bounded tools. Important words there, scoped and bounded. Maybe it updates a ticket, maybe it creates a draft purchase order, and maybe something like that would have a human approval. Or it could even be doing something like, adjusting a setting in one of your systems. But the side effect really still exists here. But because we use those scopes and bounded, they're pretty contained. So what we're recommending on the minimum control here is scope permissions, maybe an exception review, and then the full traces of what's going on. You don't have to approve every action, but you are reviewing and approving any of the exceptions. And then tier 3 is when we get into these autonomous workflows, and we're seeing a lot more of these today. This is where agent triggers real external side effects. It's actually placing the order, or it's doing the release on the credit hold. It's signaling, things in the production line, or might even coordinate with other agents that are part of like a multi-step agent workflow. So what that means is that these are going to be activities that are very high risk. And the minimum control here is going to be a lot more. We need a named human owner, approval gates on the consequential steps, full observability, and most importantly, a kill switch that an operator can hit when something goes sideways. The reason that this matters is pretty simple. When you risk tier the action, you stop having one huge giant governance debate, and you can start having like 3 specific operational conversations. In tier 1, what are we monitoring? Tier 2, who reviews the exceptions? Tier 3, who approves, and how fast can we stop it? What that means is that we can have 3 very specific conversations instead of one paralyzing one. Here's the map that we can use. Over the next couple of slides, I'm going to walk through each one of these layers in the Microsoft control stack. But I want you to look at the shape of the model first. There are 5 control planes in the Microsoft stack around AI governance. Agent 365 is really, think of it as a registry in an admin-facing control plane. It's where you're going to have the inventory, you're going to have your agent's inventory, where the ownership lives, and where the cross-platform sync is starting to happen. Microsoft Entra with Agent ID, that's the identity plane. Every agent is going to get a first-class identity, just like every user has, like every one of your users has an ID today. Microsoft Purview is the data and compliance plane. We're talking labeling, DLP, audit, posters. Then we move to Microsoft Defender. That's the real-time detection and hunting, for things plane, real-time blocking, alerts, and AI threat detection. Finally, the Microsoft Foundry control plane, relatively new. This is the build to production operations plane. And honestly, it's primarily for like your Azure-centric agents with cross-project, inventories, evaluations. There's policy enforcement in there as well. So I'm going to really move past some of the marketing slicks and, tell you what most of the product teams aren't really going to tell you. Microsoft has been converging on this as an experience, and it's not just a single pane of glass today. What you're going to hear from other people talking about, other organizations, other vendors, is that there's an easy button for the entire agent estate. And that's just not the reality today. And pretending that it is probably going to get you and the organization in trouble. So here's what I want you to hold, the model in your head. The registry is going to tell you what exists. Identity is going to tell you who it is. Data controls will tell you what it might touch. Runtime controls should tell you what it's allowed to do. And then the observability is going to tell you what actually happened. Those 5 planes, those 5 questions, those 5 operating disciplines, that's what you need to start thinking about. So let's take a look at each one of those right now. Layer 1 is that identity. So your organization already, you already understand identity for individuals, for people. Every employee that, at the organization has a badge, whether it's physical or some sort of digital. There's credentials. They have role-based access. Somebody joins your organization, you reach out to IT help and you have them provision. And when they leave, you deprovision them. So when their role changes, throughout the years that they work there, you adjust the permissions. This is the stuff you've been doing for decades. And now when we bring agents into the equation, we got to do this. They need to have the same treatment. Humans have badges. Agents need badges too. So Microsoft Entra Agent ID, which just went GA, that's where it's going to make this real. Every agent, whether it's in Copilot Studio, whether it's a Foundry agent or something that you had custom built internally or maybe with a partner, they all get first-class identity within the Microsoft tenant. It's not a service account hack. It's not a shared credential. It's a real identity that you can trace back and can be governed. Also introduces this concept of a blueprint. And blueprint is, going back to what I talked about, those three conversations, it's kind of a policy class. You define the governance rules once, and then every agent can fit that class, that blueprint class, and inherit them. So instead of chasing individual bots and trying to keep their permissions current, you can just associate them within a class and you can govern them that way. A new agent gets created, you just give it a blueprint and it inherits those policies. When the policy changes, all of the agents that have that can change as well. So conditional access also applies and it extends to agents as well. We've got OAuth 2, MCP, we've got agent-to-agent protocols. These are all supported as part of that conditional access. We've got lifecycle management, onboarding, role changes, retirement. And if your organization's identity governance is already in a pretty mature state, that you're going to find this to be pretty easy. It just extends what you're already doing. But if you're not, and honestly, a lot of organizations are a little slower on this, you should probably take this as an opportunity to force this function and let it make you fix the identity gaps that you already have. I want to take a couple of seconds just to take a look at what this actually looks like in practice. Take a look at the shape of the inventory that I've got laid out here. First, you see an agent, then you see the owner, and every agent has a named human that's going to be accountable for it. And that could be an actual person or it could be a group. But then you see that the blueprint that it's associated with, every agent's been mapped to that policy class. You see conditional access that's there. Every agent's going to inherit the same policy that your team uses for human identity. And that's kind of the point. I'm not trying to teach you the UI. I actually have a screenshot of our UI, which since this is all pretty brand new, not all the details have been filled out. These things we have to go back and apply them. But I want you to notice something really important. The shape of this is pretty familiar. This looks just like the IT consoles that your team is already operating in. So the mental model is going to be familiar, and that means that the discipline is going to be familiar and their skills are probably going to transfer. Your IT operations team should already be able to do this. And the important point is that they don't have to learn a new skill set. They don't have to suddenly become AI researchers. They can take this discipline that they already have and put it into practice. And that's really what the point is, making it simple for the users. Then we have layer 2 is the data. And here's the line that gets the most nods when I'm talking to customers. Copilot does not break into the file cabinet. It opens the drawers that you already left unlocked. So Microsoft's Copilot guidance is pretty explicit. Copilot surfaces the data that users already have permission to access. It sounds kind of like a safety feature if you think about it, and it really is. But it also means that everybody that overshared a SharePoint site or over-permissioned a document library or got lazy and just shared it with everybody, everyone accesses now become touchable by every AI system that you put into your ecosystem. And those agents are much better at finding information because that's their job than people are. So think about what I'm actually saying for you manufacturers out there. You might have things like engineering drawings. Maybe there's some supplier contracts, an Excel spreadsheet with pricing. Maybe you had some M&A diligence files that didn't get cleaned up. All those are data points that can get found. And it wasn't really supposed to be found, you didn't intend for it to be wildly accessible, but security by obscurity was maybe a discipline for a while. Copilot's making that discoverable. And so there's been a lot of maturity in Microsoft Purview, especially this year. And that product right now is shifting from the older DSPM for AI experience into a broader, more data security posture management model. And that matters because it brings the AI data story back into the governance discipline that you have a need for with the sensitive information. Purview gives you sensitivity labels. DLP for prompts and outputs are included as well. And that ability to exclude labeled files from Copilot grounding, meaning that you can say these, I don't want this to be included into the semantic model. I can have AI specific audit logs. I can posture workflows that tie remediation to specific data security guidances. but it's also going to extend past the Microsoft ecosystem. One of the things that I really liked was that I could use ChatGPT, extend into that as well. But it also includes things like Google Cloud, Snowflake, Databricks, and it's got partner integrations that go beyond that as well. So Sierra and Big ID and OneTrust are all like partners that can leverage this as well. So that's why I think of Purview is a little bit more like a data nervous system rather than anything else. And if you are going to roll out Copilot broadly, I would strongly encourage you to use Purview. If you don't, you're probably just going to be rolling out problems rather than rolling out something that people are going to find useful. So data governance, quick little visual here. I didn't want to take any screenshots of my system because it's got a lot of pretty interesting things, but here's a quick visual. On the left side, I've got Purview, like a kind of a mock-up of what Purview's DSPM view would look like. And look at the shape of it, what you would see here. I see my AI data state, like my AI's estate data posture basically in one single pane of glass. I can see the oversharing indicators, sensitive data, exposure scores, audit events for Copilot and agent interactions. But if we shift our view over to the left side in the DLP intercept, here's kind of a snapshot of what can happen. A user tried to include a sensitivity label in the engineering drawing in one of their Copilot prompts. And so what happened is that I had the policy fire and the prompt was blocked. And rather than just like a big red scary X, the user got like a coachable message. And then the audit log was used to capture what the attempt was. And so this is the kind of features and functionalities that we're seeing implemented as of the beginning of the month. And so it's not like a theoretical thing anymore. This is the governance and practice that you can use today. Let's move on to the next layer. Let's talk about runtimes. And this is where agents get a little bit weird. Up until now, we've been talking about who an agent is and what data it can see. But the real danger is what an agent can do next, the side effect. Microsoft Defender is that runtime plane. And it does three things that are going to matter. You've got real-time blocking. If a tool call is about to do something that's risky, Defender can stop it before the API call actually completes. You've got near real-time detection. It can see patterns, raise alerts, and that will hopefully give a human time to go ahead and intervene. You've got AI-specific threat protection. Defender for the cloud, that covers jailbreak attempts, data leak patterns, credential theft. You get more of that OWASP style risk categorization, and those are starting to show up a little bit more. Anybody that knows me knows that I like analogies. So here's the way that you can rethink this, hopefully to land with people in the Midwest. Think of like a bird dog. You've got a bird dog that points to your pheasant or whatever that you might be hunting, and that's its job. It doesn't actually pull the trigger. It's there to do the point. And that's the whole job of a good agent, especially when we think about like the tier 3 agents, that autonomous workflow tier. It's to the point to the thing that should happen, surface it, recommend it, prepare it. But the trigger pull, that consequential action, the irreversible step, we're still leaving that as a human decision. Or at a minimum, it should be a checkpoint that a human has to like sign off on at the policy level. So for some of you, this is the same discipline that you already have in practice today. You've got interlocks, you might have lockout, tagout. The systems, that you're using today are pretty analogous here as well. And Defender as a product is how you actually make that real. And in July, we're going to get a little bit more agent protection experiences, and they're going to be gated in the Agent 365 subscription. So as we get a little bit closer to that date, reach out to us and love to have some of those licensing conversations, make sure that you're set up for success. How do you decide when a human pulls the trigger? Think of this back from slide 8 that we had. Low risk action, monitor it. Maintenance log summary, meeting minutes, drafting the email, your audit trail, that's enough for you. You don't need to have a pro over somebody that's just summarizing some email thread or some maintenance log. On the medium risk, though, we have to review the exceptions. The agent processes maybe the agent's going to go and process 100 purchase orders, and you sample just a small percentage of that. And then you have an exception queue for those cases that fall outside of the policy. So you're setting up an agent for a system that the human isn't bottlenecking every action. They're just sort of like overseeing what the overall patterns are. And then you've got like high risk scenarios. That's where you want to have the approval required. You've got synchronous named approvers. This would be scenarios where you want to release a credit hold or triggering an outbound payment. Those are the kind of scenarios that you want to consider here. The important thing is that a human's going to sign off before the side effect actually happens. You don't want to get into that state. And whether it's regulated or sensitive, have an explicit policy, a full audit trail. That's where the compliance team and your legal teams, to me, you need to have them at the table all the way from the beginning at the design phase. And I've been using a little bit more of this Microsoft agent framework. That's the old semantic kernel as like some of our, that's the new platform that we use to develop the agents and from a pro code perspective. And what's cool about it is that we've got all these like built-in features as like first class control planes that are built into it. It's workflow pauses are baked into the platform and the platform SDK. And we can use Defender natively within there too to do explicit recommendations for human approval when we have like MCP actions that happen, or maybe when there's like an elevated prompt injection risk or something like that. That's a good way to use some of these tools with the pro code environment as well. And then layer 4, observability. And I've been doing a lot of talking about this. It's just been a really hot topic at a lot of the conferences that I've been speaking at. So I think this is a layer that separates organizations that want to scale from organizations that sort of hit this like ceiling and never really have a way to climb past it. And it's a pretty simple principle. Dashboards for agents should look more like an operational command center, right? You don't need to have a huge dashboard that looks like novelty telemetry that has like a bunch of like squiggly charts on it that nobody's really ever going to pay attention to. You really want to look at it as like a control plane, how you're going to manage work. So Microsoft Foundry combines some of these things in all in one place. It's a good example of what I'm talking about. You've got evals, you've got monitoring and tracing. And so tracing is really, that gives you the waterfall effect, like what happened, what each one of the steps were taken, in what order, with what latency, and what token cost happened with it as well. Evaluation gives you the quality signal. Was it the correct response? Was it complete? I also do things like, did the tool call that I wanted to happen, did it actually occur? And then monitoring gives you that operational metrics, like what was the full token consumption? How is that latency distribution rolling across the system? Are my tool call accuracy trends, going the right way? Here's an industry shift, that's happening today is we've got this new OpenTelemetry for agent observability. It's kind of replacing the telemetry components that we were using in the past. And what's cool about it is that Microsoft and Datadog, ChatGPT, they're all using the OpenTelemetry semantics and part of it. And that's where Microsoft Agent Framework has been jumping on board as well. So we've been converting a lot of our telemetry stuff into OpenTelemetry as well. And that helps you keep that instrumentation for your agents consistent across whatever platforms that you're using. So, and then Microsoft Foundry is using it natively inside there too. You can even do things like prompt agent tracing in there as well. The new workflow features that all has the tracing and OpenTelemetry built into it. So you're going to see that start to mature quite a bit. I just did a talk about Agent Ops webinar, I think it was last week or the week before. So you can go back and take a look at that one too. But observability, I think this is a backbone and that people need to start thinking about a little bit more. Quick little visual, keeping an eye on time here and seeing that I'm running a little bit behind, so I'm going to try to speed it up a little bit. This is kind of what you would expect to see from an agent trace. You can see, the model call all the way up at the top, but you can also see things like latency, token cost, and a confidence score for the interaction. And then you see like a retriever step, which documents it would pull. You start to get all these different components baked into it. And the reason that I keep coming back to this is that it's important to know what your agent is doing and how it's actually making the decisions. And without that observability, you're not really going to be able to uncover the root cause of why things were going off track. Lastly, the final layer, quick architectural clarification. The Foundry control plane and Agent 365, a lot of people get these, they start talking about them because of the control plane applies, where they use the words control plane in both of them, but they're not the same product. They do have a little bit of an overlap. They do complement each other, but the Foundry control plane is really the Azure operator layer. And that's where your engineering team is building, testing, deploying, and operating the agents. You've got cross-project, inventories. You can set up different projects there, policy enforcement, and custom agent registrations. That's all managed there. But what it isn't doing is not a replacement for Agent 365, because that's at the enterprise governance level. It's like how to exclude. The simple way is Foundry is the operating layer and Agent 365 is like the enterprise registry. You need both of them to exist, but they cover different audiences with a different set of data. I would look into both of those as your governance, inside of your governance model as well. So Copilot governance, Copilot Studio. Now, this doesn't always get said out loud. Copilot Studio governance is really distributed across 3 different planes today. In Copilot Studio systems, you've got the executive framework, tenant level controls. You've got Copilot governance overview. You can use Purview, and that gives you some of the label semantics like DOP and audits. And then you got Power Platform data policies that govern the actual control, the Copilot Studio mechanics. That's where the connectors can be used, which knowledge sources, what HTTP calls, you've got skills, channels, and even like some of the event triggers. So you've got 3 different consoles in 3 different policy languages, and real coordination between these 3 is going to be required. So the pragmatic answer to all this, and this is what I'd put in the operating model, RACI chart if we ever had one, and we'll talk about it a little bit later, is assign one team as the through line. Someone owns the integrated view across all of these 3. Otherwise, you're going to wind up getting policy drift between the consoles, and really no one's going to notice until something goes sideways in production. Microsoft has been converging a little bit on this, but we need to plan for this happening accordingly over the next, couple of months. Let's see. So this one, I wanted to talk a little bit about multi-cloud and some of the differences between Microsoft, AWS, Google, Salesforce, and Databricks. So Microsoft Agent 365, this is the Microsoft-centric control plane for the agentic workforce. If your shop is already anchored in M365, and most of the people that are on this call, because we're a Microsoft shop and you probably heard about us, you probably are as well. Agent 365 plus Foundry plus Entra plus Purview plus Defender, that's probably the operating system that you're looking at. But if you don't operate in those areas, AWS Agent Core, that's the packaging, identity, policy, observability, and runtime. You've got Google's Gemini Enterprise Agent Platform. That's packaging things up like agent identity, registry, agent gateway. Okta is going vendor neutral. They've got agent identity governance. Palo Alto is going vendor neutral on some of the runtime protections. You've got Datadog, Dynatrace. These are all like they're converging on that OpenTelemetry that I was talking about for observability. But what the table on the screen shows right now is that the industry has converged on some of the same primitives: identity, registry, gateway, observability, runtime defenses. And that's pretty much across all the different platforms. The names might be a little bit different, but the semantics and the things that they're actually dealing with, those are all converging. And what that means for you really is pick your anchor and plan where you want those overlays. If you're Microsoft anchored, then Agent 365 is going to be where you want to put your anchor. But if you have agents that are like living in AWS or in Salesforce, Agentforce, you should expect to need to build in some of these other overlays as well. Agent 365 Registry Sync is starting to be able to cover some of those, like incorporating Bedrock and Vertex AI and Agentforce. But preview, these are preview features that are baked in right now. And so preview means preview, and you need to assume that there's going to be some sort of changes between now and the next 6 to 12 or even 18 months. So take that with a grain of salt, experiment with some of these things, bring these ecosystems together. I'm trying to think what Jim Savage always says, that Microsoft is the marketplace for AI. So not necessarily going to own everything. They're being pretty supportive of all the things that you can do outside in the ecosystem. Where are some of the gaps? And I was thinking about this, and I've got 5 that I want to kind of call out, and maybe even a little bit about what you can do about each one of them. 1, Agent 365, the registry sync, that's still in a preview feature. The platform list is still pretty limited. You've got Bedrock, Vertex, Agentforce. They're covered in preview, but everything else that you might want to bring into your system, that's going to need some sort of a custom registration process. Mitigation for the platforms that haven't been covered yet is customization and using there's a registry API that you can use for third-party tools. Number 2, observability. I think that this agent ops story that I've been telling is resonating because people are finally starting to think about it, but not everything is completely rolled out yet. You do have prompt agent tracing. You've got workflow agents, hosted agents, and custom agents. Those are in preview though. To mitigate that, what I would recommend that you do is you standardize on OpenTelemetry across pretty much everything that you build, because everybody else is starting to natively incorporate that. And that'll give you vendor neutral observability that you can aggregate later. The third is the runtime protections. Right now, there are some integration boundaries. So for non-Microsoft runtimes, you're probably going to get a little less than what Defender actually offers you. And for mitigation strategy, maybe use an AI gateway as a central enforcement and observation point, regardless of what runtime that you're running on. That way, the gateway gives you a little bit of a choke point to protect yourself. Another one is Copilot Studio Governance is distributed really across the 3 different consoles that we saw before. Try to figure out how you can get a single through line owner, baked into it. Build out some of the RACI charts so that you don't let any one of those consoles go ungoverned. And then 5, I would say the last one is the cross-platform lifecycle actions are pretty limited right now. You can register and inventory agents in other clouds, but you can't necessarily start, stop, and version them all from a single central place right now. So what you're going to want to do is bake into your processes some explicit playbooks for each one of the platforms until there's some sort of cross-platform lifecycle management tool that's baked in there. And then let's see. Money is always a funny little topic, and this is really something that is changing on a daily basis right now. Everything we've covered, up until now has some sort of financial impact to the organization, whether it's licensing or whether it's token cost. But let's break down the actions that you can take into 3 different things. So one thing you could do is you could do nothing. That's the easy way to do it. But look at what you're going to wind up carrying as a cost. So I mentioned the shadow AI. That's real, and it's going to continue to happen. Employees, they're using unsanctioned tools, whether you like it or not. And that's going to cause, a lot of problems like oversharing, audit failures when you get audited, or regulatory inquiries. Doing nothing is an option, but it's probably not going to end really well for you in the organization. You can go the other way. You could overgovern. And that's where a lot of organizations fall into this trap. They see the risk and they start to overreact. They start banning all the tools. I'm going to give a shout out in a really negative way to here in Wisconsin, our own DNR. And I was at a DNR facility several weeks ago and was trying to get into ChatGPT to prepare for a meeting that I had with them. And it was completely blocked on their networks. They have a very hard rule. Nobody's allowed to use AI at the organization, and their guest Wi-Fi just completely has the tools blocked. So you can go completely the opposite way, right, and overgovern. And, that's going to cause, people to not be able to use these tools and learn how to use and adapt to them. And so I think that you're going to wind up not getting any return on AI because you don't have any that's being used in the system, and you're going to fall behind. So I don't think that's the right way to go either. But then in the middle path, you've got what we were talking about today with the control planes and with Agent 365. You can start to inventory your agents and give them named owners. You can start to implement some of these risk tiered, approval gates, set up those blueprints that we talked about that allow you to manage them at, kind of like a holistic level without micromanaging each one of the agents and really overwhelming your team. This is where I think you should spend some of your time is finding that right size governance for you in the organization. It's going to help you reduce, some of the exposure that you have. You'll be able to implement some of these features pretty quickly, so you get quicker ROI on some of the investments that you might be making in some of the licensing as well. Find that balance, and we can definitely help you figure out where the sweet spot is. From a plan perspective, you and the organization should think about what to do over the next 30, 60, 90 days. And I've laid out kind of where most organizations are starting and what they're able to actually accomplish, through that 90 days. So start off with an intake, right? Agents get registered when they're proposed, not after they're already been put out into production. Start to identify some of the risk tiers. Every agent, when they get provision and when they get registered, assign a tier to them. Do design reviews, security and data folks, bring them to the table at the beginning of it. And then learn how to do controlled pilots, controlled deployments. Build in some of that OpenTelemetry observability so that you can track what's actually happening to the agents that you're piloting before you roll them into production. So day 1 through 30, I would say you can focus on inventory and ownership. Find out what you have, start to assign the owners, baseline what you want to do around Purview and what your posture should be. Maybe stand up Defender's AI agent inventory to help you with some of this. And then define your intake model, how you're going to actually accomplish it, who's going to be accountable, who's going to be responsible, build out the RACI model. Don't try to fix everything in the first 30 days. You're not going to. I just showed you a screenshot a little while ago from our ecosystem. We haven't done it. You're not going to get everything right out of the gate. And then 30 days, 30 through 60, start to build in that instrumentation. Get Entra Agent ID out with the blueprints, the first set of some of your blueprints. Roll out a couple of sensitivity labels and start building out data loss policies for AI. You should maybe turn on Defender and get 1 or 2 real-time blocking definitions in scope. And then pilot some of this, so you can see how it works under a real workload. And then from 60 to 90, automate and build up some evidence. So you could start looking at implementing things like conditional access enforcement, or maybe some of the automated remediation workflows. But at the end of the day, start to figure out how you can operationalize this, what those agent ops dashboards look like, how they live, and who's actually going to be watching them. And if you follow some of those 3 steps, you're starting to build a program that you can mature over the process, over the rest of the year. So don't boil the ocean. Start with the 30, 60, 90 plan, and then we can reevaluate where you're at in 90 days and figure out what the path forward is. So if what we've covered today resonates with any of you and you're looking to talk a little bit more deeply about it, I've got 3 different ways that Concurrency can work with you. If you're looking for an AI governance and security readiness assessment, I would say this is a good place to start if you don't know what agents already exist in your environment. Maybe you don't know who owns them. There's a lot of people are building agents with the Copilot tools, and we're finding that some organizations that say they don't have any agents, you go into the covers, you actually see hundreds of them. So we could take a look at that with you. Second one is maybe one that I'm really passionate about is getting into these agent ops, conversations. And if you've already got some agents that you've got up and running and you've been experimenting with, this would be a good place for you to start with that agent ops enablement. And we can, help you figure out how to apply OpenTelemetry, how to instrument it, and then surface that up for people to review. And then lastly, we can do a frontier firm operating model kind of workshop. And if you're starting to scale beyond like just a handful of agents, and you need to figure out how that whole operating system looks like, and not just the tooling, we can help you figure that out as well. So I think that we dropped a link into the chat, for you to reach out to us, and if you want to do one of those three things. So I'm going to wrap it up here. I want to leave you with like just a little bit of a message that hopefully ties all 5 of these different workshop series together. So the frontier firm, it's not the company with the most agents. It's the company that can actually safely, directly measure, govern, and improve digital labor faster than your competitors. That's the whole point here. Not the model that you picked. It's not the number of pilots that you've launched. It's, do you have the operational maturity that lets your digital labor scale without any of the mistakes and the chaos that has typically happened. So with that, I'd say thanks for spending the last 60 minutes with me.